I'm a rich second-generation heir who never strives for self-improvement, indulging in pleasure and living a life of excess every single day. So when my family started pressuring me to get married, of course I was 1,000 times unwilling, but under my parents' forceful arrangements, I was still pushed into a blind date. The other party was a wealthy heiress my father had carefully selected. Clean family background, impressive résumé, flawless conditions, so perfect there was nothing to criticize. In less than 2 months, we rushed into marriage, but it was only after the wedding that I realized she and I were never the same kind of people. My wife, Willow, was the textbook definition of a career-driven powerhouse. Career first, she valued work above everything else. She even rushed back to the office on our wedding night. At first, I fully supported her career. After all, I genuinely admired girls who worked that hard, but what I never expected was that for the sake of climbing higher, she would stop at nothing. Even when I was lying in the ICU, she didn't care at all. She just said to me, "George, it's time to take your medicine." Chapter 1. I stood at the entrance of the cafe, repeatedly checking the address on my phone. In my 26 years of life, I had never imagined I'd sink to the point of going on a blind date, especially when I wasn't lacking money in the slightest. Sleeping until I woke up naturally every day, playing games, then grabbing drinks with friends. Just thinking about having to raise kids after getting married made me a little scared. But more than that, I was worried. Worried about whether I could really shoulder the responsibility of being a husband, a father. I shook my head, forcing those thoughts out of my mind, and muttered to myself, let's just get through what's in front of me first. With a sigh, I pushed the door open and walked in. The cafe had a nice atmosphere and wasn't crowded. After scanning the room, I spotted her working by the window, because only the seat across from her was empty. She was wearing a sharp, professional office suit. I asked, "Hello, are you Willow?" She raised her head, and only then did I see her clearly. Fair skin, refined features, and a sharp, intimidating gleam in her eyes. "Yes," she replied. "You're a bit late." "Sorry," I said. "Traffic was bad." "Have a seat." She placed the menu in front of me. "1 cappuccino, please." Willow glanced at her wristwatch and said, "My break is only an hour, so let's not waste time. I already know your basic background. You had excellent grades in school, were almost always on the scholarship list. Started a company after graduation and later sold it. No bad habits, no messy romantic history. Is there anything you want to know about me?" Her tone was cold, almost like she was handling official business. I scratched my cheek. "Not at the moment." She nodded. "Then you don't really know me. I'll give a brief introduction. I currently work at a state-owned enterprise as a technical department manager. No bad habits, no childhood sweetheart or idealized first love like in novels. I live in company-provided housing and have a car." I nodded slightly after listening, then fell into an awkward silence. Just as I was wondering how to break the ice, Willow spoke first. "I think you're pretty good. We can try seeing each other." Caught off guard by her bluntness, I looked a bit dazed as I replied, "All right, then let's end it here for today. I need to get back to work." She left her contact information, packed up her things, and turned to leave. I stared at the half cup of coffee on the table, lost in thought. After a moment, I stood up and answered a call. "Mom," my mother asked, "so how was the girl?" "Your Aunt Wu and I spent days picking her. Educated, good-looking, and with a stable job. She's pretty good. You didn't leave a bad impression, did you? You two should try getting along first. If there's no problem, get married as soon as possible." Hey, Mom, you. No one could have predicted what would happen. In the few short years that followed, Chapter 2, the deafening noise of the wedding still seemed to be buzzing in my ears. Yet it had now been completely swallowed by the bone-chilling silence of our new home. I stood alone in the middle of the spacious living room. The expensive groom's suit was still neatly fitted on my body, but the vivid rose boutonniere on my chest looked oddly wilted, out of place. The air still carried the mixed scent of champagne, perfume, and lilies, cloyingly sweet, almost suffocating. I raised my hand and stiffly loosened the bow tie that was tightening around my throat. The sound of fabric rubbing echoed with unsettling clarity in the overly quiet space. I looked around, my gaze sweeping past the brand new furniture plastered with bright red wedding characters, until it finally stopped at the entryway. Empty. The place where a bride's wedding gown should have been hanging was bare, leaving only cold metal hooks reflecting the light. Willow hadn't even had time to change out of her equally expensive wedding dress, when the host's announcement that the ceremony was complete was still echoing amid the cheers of family and friends. Her phone, set with a sharp, piercing ringtone just for work, rang abruptly, like a blade precisely puncturing the bubble of joy. I remembered the instant shift in her expression when she answered the call. Moments ago, her eyes still held the shyness and happiness of a bride. In the blink of an eye, they were replaced by an unquestionable focus and gravity. She spoke only 2 brief words into the phone. "Okay." Got it. Then hung up quickly and turned to me, her face carrying hurried, unquestionable apology. George, there's been a serious failure in the core database on the technical side. User data might be at risk of leaking. I have to go over there immediately. Her words came fast, and as she spoke, she was already reaching for the coat she had just taken off and draped over the back of a chair. You should rest early. Don't wait up for me. Instinctively, I reached out to stop her. My fingertips almost brushed the lace sleeve of her snow-white wedding gown as I frowned. Now, Willow, do you know what time it is? It's our first day of marriage. Your company has so many people in the tech department. Do they really need the department manager to rush over on her wedding night? My voice was filled with disbelief. Willow didn't pause for even a second. The coat was already slung neatly over her shoulders, the buttons barely fastened. I'm the person in charge, George. At this level of crisis, if I'm not there to oversee things, no one below can make the call. Technical problems aren't solved by throwing more people at them, especially when it involves core user data security. One wrong decision could destroy the entire project, or even bring down the company's reputation. Her speech was rapid, her logic sharp and orderly, as if she were in the middle of a project analysis meeting. Her gaze was keen and resolute, without the slightest trace of attachment a newlywed wife might have. Try to understand. Once things stabilize, it'll be fine. Go to sleep first. Understand? I opened my mouth, but it felt as though something was lodged in my throat. I wanted to say, isn't this the one and only wedding night in a lifetime? I wanted to ask, if I'm supposed to understand her work, then who is going to understand how I feel right now? Being left alone in the bridal suite like a fool. Yet all the words that surged to my lips felt pale and powerless, terribly out of place. The moment they met Willow's eyes filled with urgency that allowed no argument, I watched as she deftly grabbed her car keys. Her figure quickly disappeared into the shadows of the entryway. When the security door closed with a soft click, it felt like a massive stone crashing into my chest. Be careful, drive slowly. Almost out of pure instinct, I muttered the dry, hollow reminder toward the empty entryway. My voice was so soft that I could barely hear it myself. Chapter 3. The only response was the faint hum of the elevator descending. And then, absolute silence. I stood there like a statue whose spine had been ripped out, frozen in place for a long time, before finally dragging my heavy steps to the absurdly oversized new sofa and collapsing onto it. The expensive leather sofa let out a faint groan as it bore my weight. Above me, the elaborate crystal chandelier cast a soft yet icy light, stinging my eyes until they felt sore. Lying on my back, my mind began to rewind on its own, completely out of control. It replayed from that afternoon when my mother's phone call had left my scalp tingling. When I braced myself and walked into the cafe, Willow lifting her head from her work by the window. That cold, appraising gaze. The way she laid out both of our background checks with the clarity of a project report. And that earth-shattering line, we can try seeing each other, which had knocked me dizzy when I was completely unprepared. Then came the step-by-step routine of 7 meetings, the blind date, watching movies and eating together, visiting both sets of parents, registering our marriage, and finally, the wedding. 7 times. In just 7 meetings, 2 strangers completed the process from first acquaintance to a lifelong bond. Fast as a tornado, I tugged at the corner of my mouth, forcing out a self-mocking smile that looked worse than crying. During those 7 meetings, the number of times Willow was called away midway by work phone calls was almost more than I could count on one hand. At the movie theater, the lights had barely gone down and the opening credits weren't even finished, when her phone screen glowed faintly in the darkness. At restaurants, the appetizer had just been served when an urgent video meeting would make her hurriedly snap a photo of the food to send to her parents as proof, then grab her bag and leave. Once, we'd even scheduled a wedding dress fitting. I'd waited at the shop for over half an hour before receiving her call, thick with exhaustion and apology, saying a major security flaw had been discovered right before a project launch and the entire team was pulling an all-nighter. Every single time, I forcibly pressed down the disappointment, dissatisfaction, even anger that surged up inside me. I told myself I had to understand. In a place like the capital, competition was as brutal as a jungle, especially for a young woman in a position like technical department manager. One wrong step and she'd be dragged down by people watching her every move. It hadn't been easy for her to make it this far. I had to support her, be a considerate husband. Once things stabilize, it'll be fine. That sentence seemed to become her all-purpose reassurance, and my own anesthetic for self-deception. But on our very first night as newlyweds, that anesthetic seemed to have completely worn off. Time crawled forward in the dead silence. Outside the window, the city lights blinked tirelessly, their reflections on the empty floor-to-ceiling glass forming a massive, soundless kaleidoscope. I had no idea how long I lay there, until my phone screen suddenly lit up in the darkness. vibrating with a low buzz. Almost eagerly, I grabbed the phone. The name flashing on the screen was Willow. "Hello," I answered quickly, my voice carrying a trace of hoarseness and expectation I hadn't even noticed myself, but the voice on the other end was still professionally calm, with faint keyboard tapping and blurred voices in the background. "George, things are a bit complicated. This won't be resolved anytime soon. Go to bed early, don't wait up for me tonight. I'll probably sleep at the office." "Okay, I understand. Take care of yourself." Before I could finish, a cold, mechanical sound came through the line. Beep, beep, beep. Staring at the empty living room, a vague but deeply unsettling premonition slowly rose in my heart. Chapter 4. A few months passed, and the development of this marriage turned out exactly as I had expected. She treated the company as everything in her life, going several days in a row without coming home, and when she did come back, it was only to confirm that I, the husband in name only, was still alive. Before collapsing into bed and falling asleep, finally, one night, when I received yet another late-night call from her, I snapped. "Willow," my voice shot up suddenly, sharp in a way even I didn't recognize. "What do you take me for? A roommate you're splitting rent with? If you're gone from your company for one single day, will the whole world collapse?" I was practically shouting, my chest heaving violently. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Even the keyboard sounds paused. When Willow's voice came back, there was a trace of exhaustion I could barely catch, but more than that, it was the same businesslike calm, even tinged with impatience. "George, don't make a scene. This isn't the time to be childish. My work concerns the user's trust in the entire platform and the group's core assets. This isn't about whether the sky will fall. It's about responsibility, about the livelihoods of countless people. Can you be more mature and try to understand my position?" Mature, understand. I was so angry I almost laughed. A massive sense of powerlessness seized me, my rage slamming into something cold and soft, like cotton soaked in ice. Right, I'm not mature. I don't understand enough. I can't understand why other people's wedding nights are spent in the bridal chamber, while mine was spent losing my mind, screaming at empty air. And I understand even less whether, among all your so-called responsibilities, there's even a place for me, your husband. My voice trembled slightly from the intensity of my emotions. "George." Willow's voice turned cold, laced with unmistakable reprimand. "Now is not the time to discuss this. I'm busy. I don't have time to argue with you. That's it. I'm hanging up." Beep, beep, beep. The cold dial tone cut off every unfinished question and every ounce of anger without mercy. I held the phone up, listening to that monotonous sound, frozen in that rigid posture, as if time itself had stopped. An indescribable chill surged rapidly up my spine and spread to my limbs, more piercing than the winter night wind of the capital. For the first time, I realized with painful clarity that in the world this woman had built, my priority might not even measure up to the strings of cold code on her servers, let alone the crushing weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The light on the phone screen faded, and the room was swallowed once again by heavy darkness. I slowly lowered my arm. The phone slipped onto the soft sofa cushion with a dull thud. I closed my eyes. From deep within my body rose a kind of exhaustion that felt completely hollowed out, and a chilling premonition, one that bordered on despair. This rushed marriage might have been doomed to a certain absurd imbalance from the very beginning, and I, like a fool driven by one-sided hope, had plunged straight into it. The cold storm that began on our wedding night didn't fade with time. Instead, like the lingering gloom of a winter in the capital, it seeped little by little into the space we called home. Willow started coming home later and later. At first, she would still return around 11 or midnight, bringing the chill of the night with her. Later, 1 or 2 in the morning became normal. After that, not coming home at all happened more and more often. The wall lamp in the living room, left on for someone returning late, slowly transformed from a symbol of warm waiting into something futile and deeply ironic. I tried to communicate. One rare weekend evening when she came home early, I carefully prepared a table full of dishes she liked. Outside, the city lights were just beginning to glow. Inside, the aroma of food filled the air, creating a deliberately manufactured illusion of warmth. Chapter 5. Willow, I said as I ladled a bowl of soup for her, choosing my words carefully. "Have things been that busy lately? You don't look too well." There was a cautious note of concern in my tone. Willow was lowering her head, rapidly scrolling through the project timeline on her tablet. Hearing me, she gave only a vague hum in response. Her eyes never left the screen, her brow instinctively furrowed. Clearly, her mind was still buried in those tangled data streams and schedules. Same as always, she said. Stress testing before the new system launch. A ton of problems. She picked up the soup bowl and took a purely symbolic sip. Yet her eyes remained glued to the tablet. I continued. Then, next month, on the 3rd, my fingers tightened around the chopsticks. I tried to keep my voice sounding casual. Could we take one day, just one, and go out somewhere? There's a new hot spring resort in the suburbs. I heard the environment's pretty nice. That was my birthday. I had never stated that date so clearly before. Testing the waters with something almost humble. Hoping, absurdly, that she might remember on her own. Willow finally lifted her eyes from the screen. There was a flicker of impatience at being interrupted. And genuine blankness. The 3rd of next month. She ran through her schedule in her head at lightning speed. No, that won't work. That day's the group's quarterly strategy briefing. I'm responsible for the technical module presentation. I have to be there the whole time. The days after that are packed too. Let's wait until this busy stretch is over. Her words came fast. A clear and chilly refusal. Paired with a vague, next time, that would never actually arrive. Her gaze was frank. No deliberate avoidance. No pretense of forgetting. She genuinely, completely hadn't realized what that date meant to me. My heart felt as though it had been seized by an invisible hand and yanked straight down into the abyss. The carefully prepared dishes on the table now gave off a greasy, suffocating smell. I watched Willow lower her head again, her fingers gliding swiftly across the tablet. As if that conversation had been nothing more than a trivial interruption, her entire focus already dragged back into the massive whirlpool called work. The brief illusion of warmth at the dining table shattered completely, leaving only cold reality and a disappointment that cut all the way to the bone. Silently, I set my chopsticks down. My stomach felt tightly knotted. I couldn't swallow another bite. The words "that day is my birthday" rolled around in my throat several times. But in the end, I forced them back down. Saying it out loud would only make me look more pitiful and petty. What would it change, anyway? In her world, a world governed by airtight logic and clearly defined goals, a husband's birthday was obviously no match for a group presentation that could determine her professional future. After that crushed expectation, the days that followed became dull, heavy, and numb. Chapter 6. I began to learn how to adapt to this kind of life. I tried not to look toward the entryway to see whether an extra pair of her shoes had appeared, and not to notice whether the wide bed in the master bedroom bore the imprint of only one sleeper. I picked up again those so-called unproductive hobbies from before the marriage, clearing game after game, meeting up with my childhood friend David more and more often. I even started researching different coffee beans, putting the brand new coffee machine at home through every possible trick and variation. I used an almost deliberate idleness and a surface calm to fight against the ever-expanding wasteland in my heart, the place called being forgotten. The young man who had once felt anxious about marriage and family responsibility seemed to be forced back into his old shell. Only this time, the shell was lined with a thick, cold layer of hardened crust. Cracks spread quietly under silent indifference, destined to completely shatter one day. The fuse arrived without warning, yet felt like foreshadowing that had long been buried. In the capital's late autumn, a massive flu outbreak swept through the entire city. Unfortunately, I was hit, and hit hard. Several days of continuous high fever made every joint in my body ache. My head spun, and my throat felt as if I had swallowed razor blades. At first, I could still force myself to pour water and look for medicine. Later, I no longer even had the strength to get out of bed. I was like a fish drained of water, curled up under the icy blankets, shivering uncontrollably, my consciousness drifting back and forth between scorching delirium and bone-chilling cold. My phone lay on the bedside table, the screen lighting up and going dark. There were messages from David asking why I had gone silent, and missed calls from my mother filled with worry, burning with fever and half-conscious. My fingers trembling, I almost acted on pure instinct and dialed the number I knew by heart, Willow's. The phone rang for a long time before it was finally answered. The background noise was overwhelming, piercing alarm sounds, rapid keyboard clacking, and people shouting commands all blended together. It was obvious that she was in the middle of some kind of emergency. "George?" Willow's voice came through the receiver, noticeably hurried and distracted, nearly drowned out by the chaos behind her. "What is it? Say it quickly." "The system's crashed over here. We're in emergency recovery mode." I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat felt scraped raw by sandpaper, producing only broken, hoarse breaths. I forced myself to clear my throat. Each attempt tore through me with searing pain before I finally squeezed out a few words. "Willow, I have a fever. It's really bad. I might need to go to the hospital." Every word drained what little strength I had left. There was silence on the other end for 2 seconds, broken only by the shrill alarms continuing to scream. My heart sank bit by bit, seized by a cold premonition. "A fever." Willow's voice sounded strangely distant, wrapped in a formulaic response. There's fever medicine and cold medicine in the home first aid kit. Take some first. Drink more hot water. I really can't leave right now. The entire platform is down. We're losing millions every minute. I'll come back as soon as I deal with this. Okay. She spoke rapidly, like reciting an emergency protocol. That final "okay" sounded more like a pre-programmed closing line than a genuine question. But I tried to say more, to describe how weak and helpless I felt at that moment. Willow cut me off impatiently. Take the medicine first. Things are on fire over here. We'll talk later. Her tone carried an undeniable urgency, even a hint of impatience at being disturbed. Then the call was hung up without hesitation. Beep, beep, beep. The busy tone echoed in the empty, cold bedroom, more biting than the autumn wind outside the window. I held the phone, listening to that monotonous repetition, frozen in the same rigid posture. The contrast between the burning heat of my body and the icy chill in my heart was grotesque, dropping me straight into an abyss. It felt as if the world had instantly lost all sound and color, leaving only the cold, busy tone and my own heavy, labored breathing. A profound sense of absolute abandonment surged over me like an icy tide, swallowing me whole. I don't know how I managed to struggle to my feet. My body felt as heavy as if filled with molten lead. Every movement came with violent dizziness and dull, grinding pain in my bones. Driven by a nearly desperate instinct, I fumbled into a thick coat, grabbed my wallet and ID, braced myself against the wall, and inched my way out of the apartment step by step. The late autumn wind slashed across my burning face like knives. I shuddered, yet felt no clarity return. When I finally flagged down a taxi at the entrance of the complex, the driver was startled by my ghostly pale face and unsteady state. Kid, you don't look right at all. Hurry, what hospital are we going to? I collapsed into the back seat, named the nearest top-tier hospital, and couldn't force out another word. I just closed my eyes and gasped for air, cold sweat soaking through the inner layers of my clothes. Chapter 7. The emergency room was brightly lit and deafeningly noisy. The sharp, pungent smell of disinfectant hung thick in the air. A nurse supported me as she took my temperature and blood pressure. The red column in the mercury thermometer climbed mercilessly to 39.8 degrees Celsius. The doctor frowned as he flipped through my test results and said gravely, "High fever caused by a viral flu. But there are issues with your blood work. Your inflammatory markers are very high, and there are moist rales on lung auscultation. We highly suspect a secondary bacterial infection, with a tendency toward developing pneumonia. You need to be admitted immediately for observation and treatment. We'll start intravenous broad-spectrum antibiotics right away." He pushed several forms toward me. On top was an informed consent form for hospitalization. There are risks involved. We need a family member's signature. Where's your family? Notify them to come sign and handle the admission procedures. Family. My foggy mind turned sluggishly. I stared at the paper that required a signature. The cold printed words seemed to spin before my eyes. I picked up the pen, my fingers trembling uncontrollably from the fever and weakness. The pen tip hovered above the line marked family member's signature. Refusing to come down, the nurse urged me from the side. "Sir, can you contact a family member? This needs to be signed as soon as possible so we can arrange a bed and medication." I sucked in a sharp breath. The cold air stabbed my inflamed throat with searing pain. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the last faint glimmer of light in my gaze had completely gone out, leaving only a dead gray calm and a resolute clarity. I hesitated no longer. With shaking fingers, I clenched the pen hard, almost with a self-destructive force, and in the relationship to patient column, I wrote, stroke by stroke, 2 heavy words, spouse. Then, in the family member's signature field, I signed my own name, George. The pen scratched deeply into the paper, leaving indented grooves. After finishing the last letter, it felt as if all the strength in my body had been drained. My fingers loosened, and the pen dropped onto the cold triage desk with a crisp clatter. The nurse took the form. When she saw the word spouse and the identical name signed beneath it, she froze for a moment, then gave me a complicated look. She said nothing more and quickly turned away to make the arrangements. I was wheeled to the ward in a wheelchair. The corridor lights were a harsh white, illuminating my bloodless face. I stared at the white blocks of light sliding rapidly across the ceiling, listened to the monotonous sound of the wheels rolling over the floor. Inside, however, there was an unprecedented stillness and calm. That string, pulled tight for far too long, already beyond its limit, finally snapped completely at that moment. During the 3 days of hospitalization, I felt as though I had been cast onto a deserted island, cut off from the world. Drop by drop, the liquid from the 4 dripped slowly into the veins on the back of my icy hand, carrying away the fever, and seemingly siphoning off the last trace of vitality from my body. The gray sky outside the window, the ever-unchanging smell of disinfectant in the room, and the suppressed coughing of the elderly patient in the neighboring bed made up my entire world. My phone lay quietly on the bedside table. Aside from David's daily, unfailingly cheerful messages checking in on me, and my mother's worried inquiries, The number labeled Willow remained utterly silent. On the afternoon of the third day, my temperature finally stabilized at around 37 degrees. The soreness in my body eased considerably. The nurse removed the needle and announced that I could be discharged, reminding me to take my medication on time and rest properly for a week. I packed my simple belongings in silence, my movements slow and mechanical. Just as I stuffed the last piece of clothing into my backpack, the ward door was gently pushed open. Willow stood in the doorway, holding a fruit basket that looked like something she had hastily bought from a convenience store downstairs. She was wearing a sharply tailored dark gray cashmere coat. Her makeup was still impeccable, but deep exhaustion weighed between her brows. Faint dark circles lay under her eyes, and her lips were slightly chapped and peeling. Clearly, that all-hands-on-deck system crisis had just ended. "George," she walked in, her voice carrying a trace of hoarseness and dryness she couldn't quite hide, setting the fruit basket on the empty bedside table. "I'm sorry, I'm late," she said. "I just finished a 72-hour continuous operation. The system finally stabilized." She looked at my pale face. A flicker of guilt passed through her eyes. But more than that, there was the fatigue of surviving a disaster, and an urgency to explain herself. "Are you feeling better? What did the doctor say?" I zipped up my backpack without stopping and didn't look at her. Only after slinging the bag over my shoulder did I slowly turn around, my gaze settling calmly on her face. There was no anger in that look, no accusation, not even a ripple, just a stillness like a bottomless pool of icy water. It made Willow's heart tighten for no clear reason. "Much better," I said. My voice was still weak from illness, but my words were exceptionally clear. "The doctor said if I'd come any later, it might have turned into pneumonia." The guilt on Willow's face deepened. She stepped forward, as if wanting to reach out and touch me, but my unnervingly calm gaze stopped her hand halfway. She withdrew it awkwardly. "I'm sorry, George. I really am. That day was just too critical. The entire tech department was pinned online." Willow." I cut her off. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a cold, decisive force that instantly froze all her unfinished explanations and apologies. The ward fell silent, broken only by the faint sound of traffic outside the window. I looked at her, at this woman who was legally my wife, yet forever absent when I needed her most. Her exhaustion was real. Her guilt might have been, too, but at that moment, none of it mattered anymore. I was just tired, a boundless, soul-deep exhaustion. I took a deep breath. A dull pain stirred deep in my lungs, yet it left my mind startlingly clear. I spoke slowly, each word precise. My voice was quiet, but it was like a dagger tempered in ice, cleanly piercing the last trace of false warmth in the room. "We should get a divorce." Chapter 8. The air seemed to freeze solid. The expression on Willow's face stiffened instantly, like a finely crafted mask suddenly locked in place. The apology and exhaustion vanished, replaced by pure shock and disbelief. She seemed not to have understood, or perhaps she simply couldn't believe her ears. Her beautiful almond-shaped eyes widened slightly as she stared at me, as if searching my face for any trace of a joke or an impulsive outburst. What did you say?" she asked. Her voice was very soft, carrying a barely perceptible tremor, as though she wasn't sure she had heard those 4 words correctly. I said. My voice held no emotion at all, frighteningly calm as I repeated it. "Willow, we're getting a divorce." I paused, my gaze flicking to the wedding ring on her ring finger, still reflecting a cold glint under the ward's harsh white lights. Then I added, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring your documents. We'll meet at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. No accusations, no arguments, no hysteria, just a brief, brutally cold notice." After saying that, I didn't look at the shifting expressions on her face again. I walked straight past her, pulled open the ward door, and left. My steps were still slightly unsteady, but my back was straight, carrying a sense of finality, of no return. The ward door closed softly behind me, sealing off 2 separate worlds. Willow stood alone in the empty room, frozen in place, car keys still clenched in her hand, her fingertips icy cold. On the bedside table, the cheap fruit basket, bright red apples and golden oranges, looked especially glaring and ironic against the white background. The words "we're getting a divorce" echoed in her ears like a cold curse, reverberating again and again until her eardrums buzzed. She stared at the tightly shut door, and for the first time, she clearly felt that something had already shattered completely while she was desperately clinging to lines of code, to projects, to responsibilities, and she hadn't even seen how it broke. The next day, the capital's sky was a suffocating lead gray. The late autumn wind swept scattered dead leaves into my face, stinging with cold. I arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau entrance 10 minutes early. I hadn't driven. Wrapped in a dark, heavy coat, my face still carried the pallor of illness. My lips drained of color, but my eyes were cold, like a lake sealed under ice. At exactly 9 o'clock, a familiar red sedan pulled up precisely by the curb. Willow stepped out. She had changed into a more sharply professional black suit dress, with a matching coat. Her long hair was neatly pinned at the back of her head, revealing a smooth forehead and a slender neck. Her makeup was more meticulous than usual, clearly meant to conceal a night without sleep. Yet beneath the heavy eye makeup, the bloodshot veins in her eyes were unmistakable. She carried a craft paper document folder and walked briskly toward me. The sound of her heels striking the pavement was crisp and urgent, carrying that unmistakable, work-hardened rhythm of authority. She stopped in front of me, less than a meter separating us. The cold wind lifted the hem of her coat. "I brought the agreement," she said, her voice hoarse, wrapped in deliberately maintained composure. She handed me the folder. "Take a look. Premarital assets stay with each of us. As for after the marriage, the apartment we lived in was fully paid by you before the marriage, so it naturally belongs to you. My savings and stocks are all listed here at market value. As for the money in our joint accounts, I don't want a single cent. There's nothing else that needs to be divided." She spoke quickly and methodically, like she was presenting a pre-prepared project handover checklist. She didn't lift her eyes to study my expression, her gaze fixed on the sealed edge of the folder. I took the folder in silence but didn't open it. I had no interest in what was inside. What I wanted was simply an outcome, complete release. I looked at her lowered lashes, at her tightly pressed lips painted in vivid red, at that commanding managerial aura that clung to her even now, even while handling divorce paperwork. "Let's go in," I said. I looked away, my voice flat, and turned first toward the doors of the Civil Affairs Bureau. The procedures were completed with unsettling efficiency and smoothness, almost numbness. The staff asked routine questions, whether this was voluntary, whether there were objections to the division of property. We both responded mechanically, nodding, answering with brief yes and no. When it came time to sign, I didn't hesitate at all. The pen glided across the paper, my name left behind cleanly and decisively. When it was Willow Lou's turn to sign, her fingers paused for a fraction of a second. Almost imperceptibly, her fingertips tightened around the pen, but only for an instant. The next moment, she signed her name just as swiftly and smoothly. The handwriting was clear, identical to the way she signed off on project documents. From start to finish, she never once looked up at me, as though she were signing nothing more than an irrelevant contract copy. The steel seal came down with a dull, final thud. 2 dark red divorce certificates were slid across the desk toward us. I picked up mine. The moment my fingers touched the cover, I felt a strange, penetrating chill. I didn't look at Willow again. I turned and strode out of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Cold air rushed into my lungs, carrying a clarity that was almost cruel, and an unmistakable sense of release. I stood by the roadside without turning back. Behind me was the place I had once believed would be a harbor, but which had ultimately become a cold prison. I took out my phone. The screen lit up. I opened a ticketing app, my fingers sliding rapidly across the screen as I selected my destination. A few minutes later, a one-way ticket from the capital to the distant South City was successfully purchased. I needed to leave. Leave this steel and concrete cold jungle. Leave the air heavy with disinfectant and the stench of a failed marriage. Leave everything connected to her. Go somewhere with nothing but sunlight, ocean waves, and strangers, where, in undisturbed silence, my wounds could slowly form their own scars. Chapter 9. Behind her. The doors of the Civil Affairs Bureau opened once again. Willow stepped out, the same dark red divorce certificate clenched in her hand. She stood on the steps, watching George's figure disappear into the flow of people at the street corner without a single backward glance. His back was straight, carrying not the slightest trace of hesitation or attachment. The winter wind swept fallen leaves along the ground, spinning them past her feet. Her fingers tightened around the divorce certificate until her knuckles turned white. The cold, rigid cover felt as if it were digging straight into her bones. A vast, belated emptiness surged over her like an icy tide, swallowing her whole. She had won her project. She had held on to her job. Yet in that moment, she felt with brutal clarity that she had lost something far more important, something that could never be quantified. After George left, the capital seemed to have been muted. For Willow, life did not appear to undergo any earth-shattering change. The large apartment that had once been called home was reduced to a purely functional place to sleep. She still left early and returned late, more so than before, using relentless, high-intensity work to pack every minute of every day airtight. And yet, some things were quietly changing. In the dead of night, or in those brief moments of mental blankness after consecutive days of overtime, that empty space, once occupied by George, would suddenly crash into her thoughts without warning. The kitchen no longer carried the scent of food or coffee. There was only the cold stovetop and cabinets that remained perpetually neat. The living room sofa, wide enough for 3 people to lie on, now held only her, sitting at one end with a laptop on her knees. The silence around her was so complete that she could hear the echo of her own keystrokes. At business dinners, she began unconsciously avoiding greasy braised pork dishes, because George had once frowned and told her blood lipids were a bit high. Sometimes she would open that long silent contact on her phone, her finger hovering over the call button, only to lock the screen again in irritation. The expensive coffee machine George had tinkered with sat unused. a thin layer of dust settling on it. One night, returning home late, she collapsed onto the sofa in exhaustion and instinctively opened her mouth to call out, "Get me a glass of water." The words stuck hard in her throat. All that remained was a room full of silence, and a sharp, stabbing sense of loss. What finally caused the ice around her to begin cracking was a personnel crisis 3 months later. 6 months after the launch of the core system Willow was responsible for, a competitor exposed a hidden but potentially fatal security logic vulnerability. Although the technical team rushed out a fix and no actual damage occurred, as the project lead, she could not escape responsibility. Senior management was furious. At the board meeting, the deputy technical director, Bai Yuntao, who had long coveted her position, joined forces with several senior figures to launch a fierce attack. They questioned her technical judgment and management ability in harsh terms, accusing her of being arrogant, playing favorites, and even insinuating that her past successes had been partly due to luck. Manager Willow, Bai Yuntao pressed aggressively, the satisfaction on his face barely concealed. Did this vulnerability truly show no signs at all during early testing, or did you deliberately ignore certain risk warnings in order to rush the launch before the deadline demanded by the group? An elderly, gray-haired board member tapped the table heavily and said in a grave tone, "Willow, the position of technical department manager carries enormous responsibility. There is no room for even the slightest mistake. This time, you were lucky. What about next time? How can you guarantee it won't happen again?" Willow sat at the conference table with her back straight, her jawline taut. She presented the incident analysis report and remedial measures with clear structure, rigorous logic, and detailed data. Yet amid the waves of doubt and accusation, under gazes that were either cold or tinged with schadenfreude, she felt, clearly, for the first time, a chilling sense of isolation. She was used to charging ahead alone, used to bearing everything by herself. She had once believed that absolute professional competence and a firm hand were enough to control all situations. But now, as the storm truly hit, she looked around and realized that behind her, there was no one. Not a single pair of eyes she could trust unconditionally. Not a single presence silently supporting her from behind. The person who once left a light on for her when she came home late at night, who warmed a cup of milk for her. The person who, when she was exhausted, might clumsily tell her not to work so hard. She had pushed him away with her own hands, and he had left, without hesitation. The meeting ended at last in a stifling atmosphere. No punishment decision was announced on the spot, but Willow knew. The sword of Damocles was already hanging above her head. Chapter 10. Leaving the stifling conference room behind, Willow returned to her spacious yet frigid private office. She locked the door, then collapsed weakly against the tall leather chair, her body sinking into it as if all strength had been drained away. Outside the window stretched the capital's gray, overcast sky and its cold forest of steel and concrete. She closed her eyes, pressing her fingers hard against her throbbing temples. The images she had deliberately ignored and forcibly suppressed now burst through the dam of restraint, flooding her mind with unstoppable force. She remembered their wedding night, how she had left without hesitation, and the look in George's eyes, shock and hurt, fiercely restrained yet unmistakably clear. She remembered the dinners he had prepared with such care, again and again, only for her to cancel every single time. She remembered him lying in a hospital bed, his face flushed red with fever, struggling to call her, his voice broken and hoarse, and how she had answered him with nothing but cold procedures and a single sentence, "Take the medicine first." She remembered the moment he calmly said the word divorce, the dead, hopeless look in his eyes, and the way he signed the divorce papers and turned away, his back so resolute, without the slightest trace of attachment. Responsibility, understanding, she murmured to herself, her voice dry and hoarse. She had always believed she was shouldering the greatest responsibility, protecting the livelihoods of countless people. Yet in the end, she hadn't even managed to protect the one closest to her, the only person who truly belonged to her. She had turned the understanding and support he longed for into cold indifference and a sense of entitlement. Overwhelming regret stabbed into the softest part of her heart like countless fine needles. The pain bent her forward as she buried her face deep in her hands, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. So this was the truth. Some things are only understood once they are lost. Some fortresses look unbreakable, yet collapse in an instant when their final cornerstone is removed. Willow sat alone in the cold office for a long time, until the sky outside had completely darkened. When she finally lifted her head, the tear tracks on her face had dried, but deep in her eyes, something had shattered and been reforged. She picked up her phone without the slightest hesitation and dialed her assistant's internal line. Her voice carried an exhaustion she had never shown before, yet beneath it was a decisive, all-or-nothing resolve. "Tom, cancel all non-urgent meetings and engagements for the next 3 days. Also, help me look into someone. His name is George. He's my ex-husband. I want to know where he went after leaving the capital." On the other end of the line, Tom was clearly stunned. A few seconds passed before he reacted. "Why yes, President Liu, I'll take care of it right away. After hanging up, Willow walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city below, brilliant yet cold. Neon lights flickered, traffic flowed endlessly, and beneath every light seemed to lie a story of its own. She clenched her fist tightly, her nails digging deep into her palm. This time, she was no longer the Willow manager who only knew how to charge forward. She was going to reclaim what she had lost, no matter the cost, no matter what she would have to face. Chapter 11. Life in South City moved at a pace as slow as a languid old song. The salty, humid sea breeze replaced the hard, metallic chill of the capital's steel forest. Sunlight poured generously over my skin, carrying a warmth that felt quietly restorative. The old house I rented, with its small courtyard, became a safe harbor where I could tend to my wounds. My days were simple and orderly. I woke in the mornings to birdsong outside the window, leisurely brewed myself a cup of pour-over coffee, and sat in the yard watching golden light dance along the horizon where sea met sky. In the mornings, I handled some remote design consulting work. After selling the company, the network and reputation I'd built were still there, enough to support a comfortable, free life in this small city. After an afternoon nap, I'd stroll along the soft sand, or ride a bicycle through narrow lanes bursting with bougainvillea. At dusk, I set up an easel on the terrace and brushed paint across the canvas, capturing the ever-changing colors of sea and sky at sunset. I picked up the paintbrush again, something I'd loved as a student, then forgotten amid the grind of work. In the evenings, I usually played a few rounds of games with David, or read quietly at the community library. My body gradually recovered, my skin tanned into a healthy weak tone, and the ice in my eyes slowly melted away, though deep within, there still lingered a weariness and detachment that were hard to reach. I deliberately avoided all news about the capital. That city, and that name, were sealed away in a locked corner deep in my memory. Peace was the only thing I wanted now, until that evening, when it was abruptly shattered. I had just finished a quick sketch of seagulls sweeping across the afterglow of the setting sun. I set down my brush and was about to head to the kitchen to cook some noodles when a polite but clear knock sounded at the courtyard gate. Knock, knock, knock. At this hour, was it the community manager, or the kind old lady next door bringing fruit again? I wiped my hands and walked over to open the gate. The woman standing outside froze me in place. Willow. She was wearing a soft, off-white cashmere cardigan over a simple light blue shirt, with khaki trousers and flat shoes. The outfit was nothing like her sharp professional suits, almost deliberately gentle, even subdued. Her long hair wasn't pinned up, but fell loosely over her shoulders, slightly tousled by the sea breeze. Her face was bare of makeup. Dark shadows lay heavy beneath her eyes, her lips dry and chapped. She looked worn down, dusty with the fatigue of long-distance travel. She wasn't carrying a briefcase, just a small travel bag. When she saw me open the door, something flickered in Willow's eyes, then was quickly overtaken by a cautious, almost humble tension. She opened her mouth, as if trying to form a smile, but it came out stiff and strained. George. Her voice was hoarse from flying, with a faint, barely noticeable tremor. The calm on my face shattered instantly, replaced by cold shock and a surge of anger, like my territory had been violated. I instinctively stepped back, as if the person outside wasn't a human being at all, but an intruder carrying something contagious and deadly. "Can't you just leave me alone?" I said. My voice carried a note of weary resignation. This city, this address, was a place I had chosen deliberately to escape to. It was my last fortress. The chill in my eyes made Willow shrink slightly. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her travel bag. I had someone check the flight records, she said. And then I asked around the community here. Her voice grew quieter and quieter, filled with the awkwardness of being caught doing something wrong. There was none of the commanding confidence of manager Willow left. Had someone check, I repeated. I let out a cold laugh. In the quiet sea breeze, it sounded especially harsh. President Liu really is impressive, I said. Even after divorce, you still don't forget to exercise that all-pervasive need for control. My tone dripped with sarcasm, every word edged with ice. She shook her head urgently. No, George, listen to me. Willow took a half step forward, but my raised hand stopped her dead in place. She looked at my eyes, cold, distant, filled with unmistakable rejection, and it felt like a heavy hammer slammed straight into her chest. The pain stole her breath. She forced herself to calm down, took a deep breath, and tried to steady her voice. Lower than she had ever been before, she said, I came to apologize. George, a sincere apology. Her gaze locked onto mine. Emotions churned inside, thick, suffocating regret, cautious pleading, and a trace of vulnerability she could barely hide. I was wrong, completely wrong. I treated work as everything. I used responsibility and pressure as excuses I thought were justified. I ignored you. I ignored everything between us. I thought that as long as I was strong enough to shoulder it all, I was doing the right thing. I never realized that the things I carried would end up smashing our home instead. She paused, her voice catching, her eyes reddening fast. Every time I get off work and see a family of 3 walking down the street, I think, if I hadn't cared so much about work, would we have had a child too? I came here to apologize to you, she finished in one breath, her chest rising and falling slightly, standing there with the courage of someone who had staked everything on this moment. The sea breeze stirred her hair and the hem of her clothes. She looked like a plant battered by wind and rain, yet still stubbornly upright. But my expression didn't soften in the slightest. I simply looked at her, calm, unmoved, as if watching a performance that had nothing to do with me. That gaze chilled Willow more than anger or accusation ever could. Finished? I finally asked. My voice was frighteningly calm. Willow, your apology is well delivered. It even sounds sincere, but I curved my lips into a faint smile. There was no warmth in it, only exhaustion and indifference. It's too late. The word late hit Willow like a cold bullet, striking dead center. Chapter 12. Then tell me, how do you plan to make it up to me? I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. My gaze was sharp as a blade, yet my voice was pressed low, carrying a restrained, seething accusation. Make it up to the me who was abandoned in the wedding room on our wedding night, left there like a joke. Make it up to the me whose dates were interrupted again and again by your work calls, until disappointment became routine. Make it up to the me who signed my own name in the emergency room while burning with a high fever. Or make it up to the me who stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, divorce certificate in hand, not even bothering to look back. With every sentence I spoke, Willow's face lost another shade of color, her body trembling uncontrollably. Willow, I said, a heart isn't a machine. You can't just fix it and reboot it when it breaks. Once it's shattered, it's shattered. My voice carried an almost cruel calm as I continued. You're used to controlling everything. Used to solving all problems with your logic and efficiency. But feelings aren't a project. They're not something you can restore with a single "I was wrong" or "I'll change." Trust has collapsed. What are you going to use to rebuild it? This gentle outfit you're wearing, or the determination that drove you, travel-worn, all the way here? I stepped back, reopening the distance between us. That single step felt like the boundary between 2 entirely different worlds. The look in my eyes returned to a barren, deathly stillness. Go back, I said. The capital is your battlefield. That's where your responsibilities are, your projects, your deputy director. Don't waste your time here. We are completely finished. I worked hard to adapt to the peace I have now. Don't come and disturb it. After that, I didn't look at her face as all color drained from it. I didn't look at the light in her eyes as it teetered on the brink of collapse. I turned decisively and slammed the courtyard gate shut. Bang. The heavy wooden door cut off everything inside from everything outside. Willow stood frozen on the other side, like an abandoned statue. The salty sea wind poured into her open collar, bringing a biting chill. George's final words, each one like a blade, precisely carved open every attempt she had made to decorate her remorse and fantasies, laying the bloody, irreversible truth bare before her. Too late. A broken heart stays broken. Don't come and disturb me. Every word became a heavy shackle, nailing her firmly into an abyss of humiliation and despair. What she had thought was a 1,000-mile pursuit, what she had believed to be sincere repentance, in his eyes, it was nothing more than another ill-timed intrusion, an absurd act of self-indulgent emotion. At last, the tears burst forth uncontrollably, scorching as they streamed down her icy cheeks and splashed onto the sand at her feet, blooming instantly into dark stains. She made no sound. She only bit down hard on her lower lip, her shoulders shaking violently as she suppressed the turmoil and collapse surging through her chest. So this was it. It wasn't about lowering one's pride. It was about having the last shred of sincerity you believed to be precious smashed underfoot by the other person's own hands, then crushed again, while being told it was worth nothing at all. She didn't know how long she stood there before the sea wind turned piercingly cold. Willow raised her hand and roughly wiped the tears from her face with her sleeve, the motion almost self-punishing in its brutality. She drew in several breaths of the salty, icy air, trying to force down the choking sob rising in her throat. She stared at the tightly shut courtyard gate, the unmistakable symbol of absolute rejection. The despair and pain in her eyes slowly settled, condensed, and finally hardened into something nearly obsessive, a do-or-die resolve. Go back. No. George was right. She was used to control, used to never giving up until she got what she wanted. On the battlefield of the capital, she had never admitted defeat. Now, in a war that concerned the happiness of the rest of her life, she could not lose, and could not afford to. Too late, she murmured toward the closed gate, her voice hoarse but edged with ferocity. George, so long as you're alive, and so long as I'm not dead, it's not too late. She hesitated no longer. Turning around, she dragged her heavy travel bag and walked, step by step, along the road she had come from, toward a nearby family-run guest house that looked clean and modest. Her shadow stretched long in the glow of the setting sun, carrying a tragic, all-or-nothing stubbornness. The war had only just begun, and she, Willow, was already prepared for a long, grueling siege, even if it meant emerging battered and bleeding in the end. Chapter 13. With my back against the cold courtyard gate, I listened as the footsteps outside gradually faded away. Only then did the tension drain from my body. I raised a hand and rubbed my face hard, trying to dispel the churning irritation in my chest, and a trace of pain I refused to acknowledge even to myself. I had imagined a happy life after marriage too, imagined that we might have a child, that on weekends the three of us would go to amusement parks, go fishing. But Willow's career plans had shattered those fantasies with ruthless precision. I thought I had built my emotional walls high enough to fend off any assault from the past. Yet Willow's sudden appearance, her haggard face etched with stubborn resolve, her apologies choked with tears, were like a rusted cleaver, hacking at my heart again and again. Over the next few days, Willow lingered at the edges of my life like a ghost. She moved into that small family-run guest house and no longer tried to force her way into my courtyard. But her presence was everywhere. In the mornings, when I habitually opened the gate to go for a walk by the sea, there would be an insulated bag hanging from the handle. Sometimes it held seafood porridge, still steaming, thick and fragrant. Sometimes it was a few delicate Cantonese dim sum, crystal shrimp dumplings translucent and glistening, chicken feet braised in black bean sauce tender and richly seasoned, clearly bought from some long-established place in the city, far from here. Sometimes it was a cup of freshly ground coffee, warm and aromatic, with a small carton of fresh milk and a packet of brown sugar placed thoughtfully beside it, exactly the way I liked it. No note, no signature, only the faint, cool scent of Willow's perfume clinging to the insulated bag, subtle yet unmistakable, quietly betraying the sender's identity. Every time, expressionless, I took the bag down and set it on the stone steps outside the gate. Sometimes the neighbors' kids would bounce past, craning their necks in curiosity, and I would gesture for them to take it. More often, the carefully prepared food was left there alone, cooling from warm to cold, until it was eventually taken away by a passing stray cat or a sanitation worker. At noon, I went to read at the small library in the community center. I had barely settled into my usual seat by the window and opened my book when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a familiar figure on a bench beneath the trees not far away. Willow. She wore a simple white silk blouse and trousers, a slim laptop resting on her knees, the glow of the screen illuminating her focused profile. She seemed genuinely absorbed in work, fingers flying across the keyboard, occasionally answering calls in a lowered voice. Yet whenever my gaze drifted her way, she always seemed to sense it. She would lift her head at once and look toward me through the glass window. Her eyes were no longer sharp or imposing. Instead, they carried a cautious probing and a silent, hopeful expectancy, like a dog that had done something wrong, waiting to be forgiven. Each time, I would quickly, almost clumsily, look away, forcing my attention back to the page, but the printed words turned into meaningless, jumping symbols. Not a single line made it into my mind. Her gaze felt like invisible threads, wrapping around me, leaving me restless and unsettled. In the evenings, I rode my bike to the docks to buy fresh seafood at the fish market. In that noisy marketplace, thick with the smell of fish and the damp sea breeze, I always seemed to catch sight of Willow. She looked out of place, faintly frowning, carefully avoiding puddles on the ground and weaving through the crowd. Sometimes she stood before a stall selling sea snails, awkwardly asking the vendor questions, phone in hand as if using a translator. Sometimes she lingered at a stall selling dried fish made by local fishermen, choosing carefully before buying a large bag. Her clothes and demeanor clashed sharply with the chaos of the market, yet she persisted in blending into it, an unskilled but earnest intruder. Once, I was squatting in front of an old fisherman's stall, picking through freshly landed mantis shrimp. When I looked up, I saw Willow standing a few steps away, an eco-friendly bag full of vegetables and fruit hanging from her hand. Watching me, she seemed to want to come over, then hesitated. I immediately darkened my expression, grabbed the shrimp I had chosen, paid, and turned away without hesitation, giving her no chance to approach. She could feel every deliberate act of avoidance, every instance of coldness, each insulated bag left untouched on the stone steps. Each time I averted my eyes, each time I turned away without pause, they were like blunt knives, sawing back and forth against her heart. Frustration and grievance wound around her like creeping vines, growing unchecked. She was used to efficiency, used to working toward clear objectives, but this battle had no tactical manual, no measurable data, only the silent, unyielding wall I had built, a wall called rejection. Chapter 14. One afternoon, I was in the courtyard tending to a few newly bought succulents when faint sounds of an argument drifted in from outside the gate. "Miss Willow, it really won't do. Mr. Wong specifically told me that nothing is to be left at the door anymore, especially things you bring." It was old Chan, the community administrator, his voice filled with embarrassment. "Uncle Chan, please, Just this once. This is freshly made loquat and snow pear soup. I noticed he seemed to be coughing a bit these past few days. Willow Lu's voice carried a plea, no trace of the high and mighty President Lu. Ah, Miss Willow, please don't make this hard for me. Mr. Wang gave very clear instructions. He said if I see it again, I should throw it away directly, or feed it to the cats. Old Chan's tone was heavy with helplessness and sympathy. After a brief silence, Willow said, "Then, all right. Thank you anyway, Uncle Chan." Her voice dropped, thick with disappointment. Then came the soft sound of the insulated bag being set down, followed by Willow's footsteps as she turned and walked away, those steps sounding noticeably heavier than usual. Inside the courtyard, my hand paused midair, gripping the watering can. Droplets splashed softly onto the fleshy leaves of the succulents. My expression didn't change as I continued what I was doing, as if I hadn't heard a thing. Only the stream of water pouring from the spout seemed a little harsher than before. At dusk, the sky darkened, and the sea wind carried the damp scent that came before rain. I decided to take a walk by the shore. I had barely reached the mouth of the alley when fat raindrops began to fall without warning, instantly merging into a curtain of rain. I cursed under my breath and turned to run home for an umbrella, when a large, dark blue one suddenly opened above my head. I spun around. Willow stood half a step behind me, both hands gripping the umbrella handle to keep it angled over me. Half of her shoulder was exposed to the icy rain. A large patch of her light-colored cardigan quickly darkened as it soaked through. Water dripped from her hair, tracing down her pale yet stubborn face. "Take the umbrella. Go back quickly, don't get soaked." Her voice was blurred by the sound of rain, yet carried an urgent insistence as she tried to push the umbrella into my hands. That gesture, this image of her holding an umbrella for me in the rain, was like a stone dropped into deep water, instantly shattering the icy mask I had forced myself to maintain for days. A flame long suppressed, woven of anger, grievance, and violation, shot straight to my head. "Willow, what do you want from me?" I violently swatted the umbrella handle away. The force sent it flying from her hands, tumbling across the wet ground. In an instant, cold rain drenched us both, like a cornered beast pushed beyond its limit. I glared at her with bloodshot eyes, my chest heaving violently. My voice, hoarse with rage, roared, "Bringing food, bringing soup, following me around like a shadow, and now you show up to bring me an umbrella. Are you acting out some tragic melodrama? You think this will soften me up, make me forget how you treated me?" Rain streamed down from my hair into my eyes, stinging sharply, but it was nothing compared to the fury and piercing pain tearing through my chest. "Drop the act," I shouted. "I don't need it." I pointed at the lone umbrella on the ground, then toward the alley leading to the guest house where she stayed. Every word forced out like shards of ice clenched between my teeth. After that final outburst, I didn't look at her face, now white as paper, filled with shock and hurt. Ignoring the torrential rain, I turned and charged straight into the downpour without looking back, my figure vanishing quickly around the corner of the alley. Willow was left standing there alone, frozen in the pounding rain. Chapter 15. The rain battered Willow mercilessly. Her soaked clothes clung tightly to her body, icy and bone-chilling. The umbrella George had knocked from her hands lay in the muddy water, like the sincerity she had just had trampled underfoot. His roaring words echoed in her ears like the most vicious curse, over and over again. Every single word was like a poison-tipped whip, lashing brutally against her already scarred heart. More humiliating than being pointed at and reprimanded by Bai Yuntao in the office. More despairing than standing alone in the empty, freezing marital home. All her efforts, all her humility, all her clumsy attempts to make amends. In his eyes, they had become nothing but disgusting performances and relentless entanglement. Cold rain mixed with scalding tears streamed freely down her face. She stared in the direction where George had disappeared, her body shaking violently, not from the cold, but from a pain that reached deep into her bones. The agony of being utterly denied and rejected. Slowly, very slowly, she sank into a crouch, wrapping her arms tightly around her icy knees and burying her face deep within them. Her shoulders convulsed as suppressed, broken sobs finally escaped from deep in her throat, drowned out by the crashing rain. The torrential downpour washed over the narrow alley, icy water coursing unchecked across the blue stone pavement. Willow curled on the soaked ground like an abandoned clay figure, arms locked tightly around herself, her body trembling uncontrollably with violent sobs. George's venomous words were like solid ice spikes, stabbing again and again into her already shattered heart. All her pride, all her resolve, all the courage she had gambled everything on were washed away by the cold rain, leaving behind nothing but bone-deep humiliation and despair. She didn't know how much time passed. A black sedan glided silently to a stop at the entrance of the alley. The door opened, and a large black umbrella was raised as someone hurried toward Willow. "Willow." A familiar, anxious voice pierced through the rain. Willow lifted her head blankly. Rain and tears blurred her vision, but her mother's face, filled with shock and heartbreak, crashed clearly into view. Behind her stood her father, holding another umbrella, his brows tightly knit, his expression grim beyond words. Mom. Dad. Willow barely managed to utter the two broken syllables before overwhelming grievance and fragility surged like a breached dam, swallowing her whole. Like a lost child, she threw herself into her mother's warm, faintly fragrant embrace and burst into uncontrollable sobs. All the repression, all the humiliation, all the regret poured out in that moment. Willow's mother held her daughter tightly, the girl soaked through, icy cold, trembling in her arms, her heart aching beyond measure. She looked up at her husband, a resolve she had never shown before burning in her eyes. Old Willow, this can't go on, she said urgently. Willow will break down like this. That George, how could he treat Willow this way? Willow's father looked at his daughter collapsing in his wife's arms, then at the umbrella on the ground, soaked through with mud and rain. Thinking of his daughter's recent dazed state and her stubborn insistence on coming south, he let out a heavy sigh. Take her back first, he said quietly. Get her out of these wet clothes. Don't let her really fall ill. His voice was low, carrying the oppressive weight of an approaching storm. From childhood to now, when had his daughter ever suffered such humiliation? And yet matters of the heart were never so easily judged by outsiders. Still, seeing his daughter like this made his heart ache as if it were being carved by knives. Chapter 16. Meanwhile, behind the tightly shut gate of the courtyard, the atmosphere was just as heavy and oppressive. I rushed back inside, drenched from head to toe. My hair hung in messy strands against my forehead, water dripping continuously from the tips and down my chin. My chest rose and fell violently, not from running, but because of what I had just said. Those words, they had been too harsh. In the living room sat two unexpected visitors, my parents. They had clearly arrived not long ago. Local specialties from home were still set out neatly on the coffee table. Seeing me in such a disheveled and agitated state, my mother jumped to her feet in alarm. George, what happened to you? Why are you soaked like this? It's pouring outside. She hurried off to grab a towel. My father, meanwhile, remained seated on the sofa, his face dark, his sharp eyes carefully examining my abnormal emotional state. He had vaguely heard the intense argument outside the courtyard gate. What's going on? He asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the unquestionable authority of the head of the household. I grabbed the towel my mother handed me and roughly wiped my hair and face, my movements crude and impatient. I didn't want to explain, and couldn't, even if I tried. That nameless fury was still crashing around inside my chest. Nothing, I snapped irritably. Nothing. My father's voice suddenly rose. Nothing. And you make yourself look like this. Nothing. And you're shouting so loudly the whole alley can hear you. Who was outside just now? Was it Willow? That name was like a spark thrown onto dry tinder, instantly igniting the emotions I had been desperately suppressing. She just won't let go. I ground out through clenched teeth. She chased me all the way here, bringing food, bringing soup, following me around like a shadow. And just now she even pretended to give me an umbrella. Who is she acting for? What was she doing back then? And now she shows up playing the devoted ex-wife. I'm sick of it. I told her to get lost, get as far away as possible. I roared at my parents like a completely enraged trapped animal, as if trying to pour out all the resentment that had built up over this time. My mother was frightened by my unprecedented outburst, standing there helplessly, eyes reddening. George, don't be like this. If you have something to say it properly. Say it properly, I panted, my chest heaving violently. There's nothing to say with her. We already got the divorce certificates. We're done, completely cut off. What right does she have to keep interfering with my life? My father, who had remained silent until now, watched me spiral out of control, his brow nodding into a deep frown. He stood up and walked over, fixing me with a heavy, penetrating gaze. Completely cut off, he said. George, look me in the eyes and tell me, right now, when it comes to her, is it really just hatred, just annoyance? Is there truly nothing else at all? His stare made my chest tighten. I instinctively wanted to argue back, but it was as if something lodged itself in my throat. Images I had deliberately sealed away. The sharp glint in her eyes when we first met at the cafe. The coolness of her fingers when she held my hand at the wedding. Even her tired profile when she came home late at night. They flashed uncontrollably through my mind. I turned my face away in irritation. My voice dropped, tinged with an embarrassment I couldn't quite hide. Dad, you don't understand what she was like before. I don't understand you young people's dramatic love-hate entanglements. My father cut in. His voice carried the weight and weariness of someone who had lived through storms. But I understand responsibility. I understand accountability. And I understand what it means when water is spilled and can never be gathered again, what it means to regret something too late. His gaze swept toward the corner of the living room, to the easel standing there. It was draped with a cloth, but one corner of the canvas showed through. It was no longer the bright, sunlit seascapes from before, but a suffocating, turbulent gray ocean, churning with furious waves, streaked even with harsh, blade-like slashes of dark red. Look at what you're painting now, he said, pointing at the easel. My father continued, is this the peace you say you want? That fire inside you hasn't gone out at all. You're just using coldness and avoidance to punish her, and to torture yourself. He took a deep breath, his tone softening, heavy with earnest concern. George, I'm not telling you to forgive her. What she did before really did hurt you deeply. But in this life, who never makes mistakes, what matters isn't clinging to past wrongs, it's whether that person truly regrets them, and whether they're worth giving another chance. When your mother gave birth to you, she nearly died. She came back from the brink, and afterward her temper became terrible. She'd explode over the smallest things, yell at me, smash things, say she couldn't go on and wanted a divorce. I was young and hot-headed back then too, full of resentment, thinking she didn't understand how hard I worked. But do you know what changed everything? One sentence from your grandmother, she said. She risked her life to give you a son. Her body and heart are both hurting right now. You're a grown man, what are you competing with her over? She lashes out at you because you're the closest person to her. If not you, who should she lash out at? My father's voice grew low. That's when I finally understood. Sometimes it's not that the other person doesn't care about you. It's that they may be enduring pain and pressure you can't even imagine, and they're expressing it the wrong way. I let go of that worthless pride and grievance, stayed by her side patiently, coaxed her through it slowly. Life got back on track. That Willow girl, she is too strong-willed, too obsessed with work. That's true. But this time, she was willing to put everything in the capital aside, travel thousands of miles to come here, endure your coldness, even endure being scolded like that without leaving. That sincerity, that persistence. Can you really not see even a shred of genuine feeling in it? Or are you just afraid? Afraid of being hurt again, so you'd rather seal yourself completely inside the hardest shell you can find? Chapter 17. My father's words landed like a heavy hammer, striking again and again at the most fragile part of my heart. I stared at him blankly, at the weighty understanding and deeply buried concern in his eyes. The anger and resentment that had been piling up inside me deflated like a punctured balloon, rapidly collapsing. In their place came a vast emptiness, and a trace of awkwardness at having my true thoughts laid bare. Was I afraid? Yes, I was afraid. Afraid of handing my heart over once more, only to be met again with bone-deep coldness and casual neglect. I had built high walls, shutting her out, but also shutting out every possible hurt and every possible hope. I sank heavily onto the sofa, plunging both hands into my still damp hair and burying my face. My shoulders trembled slightly, not with anger this time, but with a fatigue and inner struggle that had nowhere left to hide. My father's words were like a beam of harsh light, shining into the part of my heart I had deliberately sealed shut, leaving me unable to continue deceiving myself behind that wall called hatred. At the family-run guesthouse on the other side of the small city, Willow was wrapped tightly in a thick blanket, curled up in her mother's arms like a frightened little animal. A hot shower had chased away the chill from her body, but it couldn't warm a heart riddled with wounds. In broken, choking fragments, she told her parents everything that had happened over this time, from the moment she realized her mistakes, to swallowing her pride and chasing after me, to my increasingly icy rejections, and finally to the rain-soaked humiliation that had pushed her completely into the abyss. Willow's mother listened with tears streaming down her face, gently patting her daughter's back in anguish. Silly child, you've suffered so much, she said, then looked at her husband with a sob. Old Willow, look at her. How can George be so cruel to Willow? Willow's father had listened in silence the entire time, his expression growing darker by the minute. He lit a cigarette and walked to the window, staring out at the rain that was still falling steadily outside. Through the drifting smoke, his eyes were sharp and conflicted. After a long while, he stubbed out the cigarette, turned back, and spoke in a low voice that carried undeniable authority. Willow, crying won't solve anything. His gaze settled on his daughter's pale, exhausted face. I'll ask you this, do you truly understand where you went wrong? Do you truly love him and want to win him back? Or is this just unwillingness to accept defeat, or the loss of face after divorce? Willow jerked her head up. Her swollen red eyes were filled with urgency and pain. Dad, she said, I really know I was wrong. I was awful before. I used work as the only way to escape family responsibility and to prove my worth. I treated his patience and his waiting as something I was entitled to. I never once tried to see things from his perspective. Her voice trembled with tears, yet it was fiercely resolute. I love him. This isn't about unwillingness to let go. If it were just about saving face, I, Willow, wouldn't have lowered myself into the dust to beg him like this. Chapter 18. Willow's father fixed his gaze on his daughter's eyes, scrutinizing every subtle change in her expression. At last, he nodded slowly. Good. Since you're sincere, then stand up. He stepped in front of her, his tall figure radiating an overwhelming pressure. Put away your tears and grievances. The way you look now does nothing except make your mother worry and make George look down on you even more. If you want him to see your change, It won't be through sending a few meals or holding an umbrella for him. Those are cheap gestures. It has to be through action, through time, through the grit and sense of responsibility that run deep in your bones. Willow. He paused, his tone firm and decisive. Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to George's place. Not to beg him, to apologize. To formally apologize for all the neglect and hurt you caused him in the past. And to apologize to his parents as well. We failed to raise our daughter properly, letting her lose her sense of duty in her marriage. After that, you'll pack your things and return to the capital with me, Dad. Both Willow and her mother cried out at the same time. Back to the capital? Willow's mother asked in confusion. Then what about Willow? Willow's father cut in. Going back to the capital is not giving up, he said, his eyes sharp as fire. It's for you to go back and settle everything cleanly. Hand over what needs to be handed over. Delegate what needs to be delegated. And then, resign from that damn department manager position of yours. What? Willow was completely stunned. Why? Her father asked coldly. Can't bear to part with it. He continued without mercy. If you can't let go of that position, then forget about winning George back. You can't have both the fish and the bear's paw. Since you, Willow, have chosen to reclaim your husband and your family, you must have the courage to burn your boats. Go back, clean up your work completely, and then return here with dignity, without any baggage or excuses. Use every single day from then on to prove that your repentance today isn't empty talk. Learn again how to be someone's wife, rather than a machine with nothing in its head but code. Her father's words struck Willow's muddled mind like thunder. Resign. Give up everything she had fought for over so many years. The thought had once flickered through her mind during her most desperate nights, but never had it been placed before her so ruthlessly, so decisively. The shock left her momentarily speechless. Dad. Her lips trembled as turmoil surged inside her. That job had once been her pride, the very proof of her worth, the foundation that allowed her to stand firm in a harsh world. To give it up was like stripping away the hard shell she depended on to survive. Her father pressed on, his gaze sharp and unyielding. What? Afraid now? Or is it that, in your heart, that job is still more important than anything else? If that's the case, then give up now. Stop provoking George, and stop tormenting yourself. Go back to the capital. Keep being manager Willow, and spend the rest of your life with your projects. No. Willow blurted it out almost instinctively, her voice hoarse with a do-or-die resolve. Her father's words were like a blade, cutting cleanly through the last of her hesitation and self-deception. She lifted her head sharply. The confusion and fragility in her eyes were replaced by a nearly tragic determination. I'll quit, she said. I'll go back and resign. Saying those words felt as if all the strength had been drained from her body. A sharp pain stabbed at her heart. Yet what followed was an unprecedented clarity, painful, but unmistakably clear. At last, she understood her father's meaning. There could be no rebuilding without destruction. The root of all her past mistakes lay in the fact that she had never truly made a choice between career and family. Greedy for everything, she had used work, cloaked in the noble excuse of responsibility, to devour the time and emotional energy that belonged to her family. If she wanted to win George back, if she wanted to rebuild the home she had destroyed with her own hands, she would have to sever completely the rope that bound her to the identity of manager Willow, and return with a new self, fully committed, holding nothing back. Good. For the first time, a trace of approval appeared in Willow's father's eyes. He patted his daughter on the shoulder. That's more like the daughter of the Willow family. Tomorrow, you'll come with me to apologize. Then we'll go home and deal with what needs to be dealt with. Chapter 19. Early the next morning, after the rain had cleared, the air felt exceptionally fresh, carrying the salty dampness of the sea breeze and the earthy scent of wet soil. There was a knock on the gate of my courtyard. I hadn't slept all night. Dark circles lay heavy beneath my eyes. When I opened the door and saw Willow's parents standing outside, and behind them, Willow herself, still pale and worn but standing perfectly straight, her gaze unnervingly calm, I froze. Uncle, Auntie, please come in. I stepped aside, my voice carrying a complexity I couldn't quite conceal. My own parents, hearing the commotion, also came out. The atmosphere turned stiff and heavy. Willow's father was the first to speak, his voice loud, open, and forthright. George, in-laws, my wife and I are here today to formally apologize on Willow's behalf. Willow took a deep breath and stepped forward. She looked directly at me, then at my parents behind me. Her eyes no longer avoided, no longer pleaded. They held a stripped-down honesty, weighted and resolute, as if all excess had been burned away. George, Dad, Mom. It was the first time she had addressed them that way. Her voice was steady and clear. I'm sorry. This apology comes far too late, she continued calmly. In the past, I was selfish and arrogant. I treated work as the only way to escape family responsibility and to prove my worth. I took your tolerance and your waiting for granted, yet never truly cared about your feelings. I failed to fulfill even the most basic duties of a wife. I ignored you, hurt you, and was absent again and again when you needed me most. Even when you were sick in the hospital, signing consent forms by yourself. I was still staring at a computer screen. Her throat tightened slightly, but she forced herself to continue, each word precise. I was not a qualified wife. Yesterday, my father scolded me, she said, and he was right. Tears and grievances are useless. Coming here to bring food or umbrellas, if I'm honest. It was less about winning you back and more about my own inability to let go of guilt and unwillingness. At its core, it was still selfish. I never truly understood how deep your wounds were, nor did I have the resolve to change at any real cost. She paused, then looked at me with unwavering determination. So today, I'm here to formally apologize to you, and to Dad and Mom as well, for everything I did in the past. After this, I will return to the capital with my parents. My pupils contracted slightly. Willow's voice grew even firmer. When I go back, I will resign from my position as technical department manager at the group. I will complete all handovers properly. Everything in the capital, my career, my status, my reputation, I'm giving it all up. She noticed the flicker of shock in my eyes, and the visible emotion on my parents' faces. Instead of wavering, she seemed to grow calmer, because I know that if I return still carrying my old identity and those chains, no matter what I do, I will never truly be able to start over. Only by completely saying goodbye to Manager Willow can I relearn how to be a real Willow, one who might, perhaps, still be worthy of standing beside you and trying to make up for the past. After finishing, she bowed deeply, nearly 90 degrees, toward me, and then toward my parents. The gesture was heavy with remorse, and with an all-or-nothing resolve. The courtyard fell into silence. Only the soft rustling of leaves stirred by the sea breeze could be heard. I stood where I was, staring at the figure still bent in a deep bow, my heart thrown into violent turmoil, resigning from her job, giving up everything she had fought half her life to obtain. The weight of that decision far surpassed all her previous gestures, all her tears. For the first time, I saw with absolute clarity that she wasn't acting. She wasn't trying to win sympathy. She truly was, stripping off her hardest armor, proving her remorse in a way that was almost self-destructive. My father watched the scene, complex emotions flickering in his eyes, shock, and a quiet, reluctant stirring of empathy. My mother had already begun wiping away tears. Willow's father stepped forward, helped his daughter up, then turned to me. His tone was solemn and resolute. George, as her father, I also bear responsibility for Willow's mistakes. We indulged her ambition too much and neglected to teach her what it means to be a wife, a daughter-in-law. Bringing her here today to apologize is the stance of our family. As for whether you forgive her, whether you're willing to give her another chance, that is entirely your right. We will never force you. After Willow resigns, we will take her back to the capital to handle the aftermath. If she returns here afterward, whether she stays or leaves will be entirely up to you. Our family will not interfere again, in any way. His words landed firmly, stating his position clearly, while granting me the greatest possible respect and freedom of choice. My gaze lingered on Willow. She stood upright now, chin slightly raised, meeting my eyes head-on. In her gaze were pain and unease, but more than that, a calm born of something like rebirth, a quiet readiness to accept judgment. Sunlight fell across her pale face, giving her a fragile yet astonishing strength. My throat tightened, 1,000 words jammed in my chest, but in the end, they condensed into a single, difficult gesture. I shifted slightly to the side. I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't say I rejected her. I simply stepped aside, clearing the path to the courtyard gate. That silent gesture itself was a signal that I was no longer forcefully driving her away, a hesitant, ambiguous permission that left room for possibility. Willow saw my movement. Her eyes reddened instantly, but this time, she didn't let the tears fall. She pressed her lips together, nodded firmly at me, then at my parents, once more. Then she linked arms with her mother and followed her father, step by step, out of the courtyard that had carried all her love, hatred, and entanglement. Her back still looked slender, yet it was held straight, carrying the resolve of someone marching toward an unknown battlefield. I remained standing there in silence as the figures of the Willow family disappeared at the end of the alley. The sunlight felt a little too bright. I raised a hand to shield my eyes. The frozen, stagnant water in my heart had been struck by a massive stone named Resolve, sending out roaring waves and ripples. Would she really resign from her job? The sea breeze brushed gently against my face, carrying the distant whisper of the tides. The answer no longer felt far away. Chapter 20. Outside the VIP delivery room, the atmosphere was taut, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. I paced back and forth in the corridor like an anxious trapped beast. My expensive leather shoes struck the floor with rapid, dull echoes. I had already taken off my suit jacket and draped it carelessly over my arm. 2 buttons of my shirt collar were torn open, exposing the tight lines of my neck. Fine beads of sweat covered my forehead. My eyes were locked on the tightly closed delivery room door, the symbol of the unknown. From inside came faint, suppressed cries of pain, and every single sound lashed my heart like a whip. Why is it taking so long? Didn't you say everything was going smoothly? I asked the nurse beside me in a hoarse voice, unable to hide the panic in my tone. The nurse tried to reassure me patiently. Mr. Wong, twin deliveries do take longer. Mrs. Willow's vital signs are stable at the moment. The doctors are all inside. Please don't worry too much. Don't worry. I cut her off, my voice rising uncontrollably, on the verge of collapse. How could I not worry? I remembered the last prenatal checkup, when the doctor had hinted cautiously that Willow's body was somewhat weak from years of overwork, and that with twins, the delivery might be more difficult. That buried concern was now magnified infinitely, nearly swallowing my reason whole. Time crawled by second, like a dull knife carving flesh. The delivery room doors opened occasionally as nurses rushed in and out, each time sending my heart straight into my throat. Suddenly, the doors were pushed open hard. A doctor wearing a mask strode out, his expression grave. Mr. George. I'm here. I lunged forward in one step. My heart pounded wildly, almost bursting out of my chest. The doctor spoke rapidly. The mother is experiencing weak contractions. Labor has stalled, and the fetal heart rates are showing signs of decline. We're taking measures, but the situation isn't optimistic. We need your signature now. We may have to proceed with an emergency cesarean section. And, he paused, his tone growing heavier. Please prepare yourself mentally. If a critical situation arises, you must be ready. I snatched the consent form and pen from his hands. My fingers trembled violently from the force I was using, the pen tip nearly piercing the paper as I signed my crooked name with all my strength. Every stroke felt like it was being carved into my heart. Please make sure she's safe, I said. I'm begging you, make sure she's safe. After signing, I grabbed the doctor's arm tightly. My eyes were bloodshot, filled with terror so thick it was almost tangible. I begged like a helpless child. Children, the future, none of that mattered at this moment. I just wanted her alive. I just wanted Willow alive. The doctor nodded with understanding and quickly turned back into the delivery room. The doors closed again, sealing off every sound inside. It was as if all strength had been drained from my body. I leaned against the cold wall and slowly slid down to the floor. Sweat soaked through my shirt, my damp bangs plastered to my skin. I covered my face with both hands. My shoulders shook violently, and suppressed, broken sobs spilled out through my fingers. A massive wave of fear drowned me. Never in my life had I felt so acutely that I could not lose her. All the resentment, coldness, and distance from the past became insignificant as dust in the face of life and death. I only knew that if I lost her, my world would completely collapse. I didn't know how much time passed. It felt like an entire century. Finally, the delivery room doors opened once more. Mr. George, congratulations. Mother and babies are safe. A nurse emerged, holding two tightly wrapped bundles, her face lit with relieved joy. It's a very healthy set of twins, a boy and a girl. Mrs. Willow is a bit exhausted and under observation, but she'll be out soon. The taut string snapped at once. I jerked my head up. In my bloodshot eyes, an overwhelming, indescribable light exploded. I scrambled to my feet, almost using both hands and feet, stumbling toward the nurse, yet my gaze desperately tried to see past her, searching the inside of the delivery room. What about her? I asked urgently. How is Willow? My voice was unbearably hoarse, trembling with survival and relief. She's doing very well, the nurse replied with a smile. Just completely exhausted, she fell asleep. She stepped aside slightly. At that moment, a gurney was pushed out. Willow lay on it, her face pale as paper. Her hair was soaked with sweat, clinging messily to her cheeks and forehead. Her lips were drained of all color, and her whole body looked so weak it seemed a single breath of wind could scatter her. Her eyes were closed, as if she had fallen into a deep sleep. My heart clenched again in an instant. I rushed to the bedside and carefully took her cool hand that hung over the edge of the gurney. My voice dropped to a whisper, afraid even the slightest sound might disturb her. Willow, Willow. Her eyelashes fluttered faintly. With immense effort, she opened her eyes just a sliver. Her vision stayed blurred for a long moment before it finally focused on my face, filled with worry, terror, and overwhelming joy. Seeing my reddened eyes and the tear tracks still wet on my face, something slammed hard into her heart, leaving it aching and soft all at once. Summoning the last bit of strength she had, she gently squeezed my sweat-damp palm. Her cracked lips moved, and a breath so faint it was almost inaudible slipped out. Don't go. It sounded like a dream murmur, yet also like the deepest fear and reliance she had buried in her heart. That single phrase carried an electric shock. It shattered every last line of defense I had. My tears broke free completely, pouring out uncontrollably. I bent down and pressed my forehead gently against the back of her cool hand. Burning tears dripped onto her skin as my voice broke beyond recognition. I won't go. I'm not going anywhere. Willow, I'm here. I'm right here with you. We have children now. 2 of them. They're both fine. You're fine too. My words were a mess. I just kept promising, kept talking, as if I needed to pour out every fear of loss, every moment of almost losing her. Every ounce of gratitude for getting her back, right here, right now. Willow listened to my broken voice, felt the burning wetness on the back of her hand. The corners of her lips lifted almost imperceptibly before she closed her eyes again, exhausted. This time, her breathing grew steady and deep, carrying a peace and relaxation she had never known before. Dad, I caught a fish. I turned around, and there it was, the scene I had dreamed of my entire life. My energetic son came running toward me, proudly clutching a small fish in his hands. Behind him followed our daughter, and Willow, walking a little faster, called out with mild irritation mixed with affection, "Slow down, be careful, you'll fall." In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty, I was the happiest person in the world, no exceptions.